Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Noxcast, the Equinox News Recap Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Hope. I'm the managing executive editor of the Equinox.
Now I'm Chloe Erno, the news editor.
And this week, we're back at it again with a pretty action-packed paper here with a variety of stories on a variety of different topics, good and bad. So we're coming at you, and we have a lot to go over. So I did want to mention before we got into anything that some cool just Equinox-related news is, as of recording yesterday on Wednesday, April 8th, some of us on the e-board got to speak with Senator Jeanne Shaheen about a variety of issues. It was a brief visit before she toured the optics lab as part of a tour of congressionally directed spending projects that she helped secure. But she wanted to mainly go over a new law that we're going to shortly talk about involving not being able to present student IDs as proof of identification to vote in New Hampshire. So we mainly touched on that, and there was a couple questions just about higher ed funding like we've talked about, and also the war in Iran, as she's the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So that was nice to sort of bring that student voice to someone who's a sitting senator, and just another example of one of the amazing opportunities that we have for those who want to get more involved with the Equinox. So I'm grateful to Senator Shaheen's team for reaching out and having the thought of trying to meet with us and doing so, and just a really cool opportunity. But with that being said, let's get into the proper recap here. So the top story in news is from our staffer, Sam, and this is event coverage of a town hall style event that they held in the student center, which was a discussion about sort of defending democracy broadly. It's really about some of the attacks on the voting systems and the integrity of the vote count and things like that we've seen in years past now, where there's legislation, executive orders, and things like that which sort of aim to change, or the federal government doing a little bit of overreaching into what the states typically handle, which is their own elections. So this was a meeting that saw three main speakers, which were former ambassador and U.S. House Rep for New Hampshire, Richard Sweat, former House Rep Charlie Bass, also from New Hampshire, and the current New Hampshire Secretary of State, David Scanlon. So got to hear from some, one prominent current official, and then a couple prominent former elected officials, one Republican, one Democrat, and sort of just got their thoughts in terms of how things are nowadays with like the rhetoric, and sort of just hearing that perspective again of the bipartisan support for making people feel confident in the system and that their vote will be counted.
Yeah, and I want to say it was great coverage by Sam, a lot of great quotes in the article, and very thorough coverage of the event. But there was one particular part of the discussion that really stuck out with me, where they were talking about the current state of the Republican Party. And it was interesting seeing someone who was and probably still is a Republican just comment on that and really look into what's been happening and the current state of the party. Because I've never been a Republican, I never will be, but to see that perspective of someone who's been there was just really interesting for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, these events where any officials or former officials are able to come to campus and sort of talk through these issues that a lot of students think about, and those who don't maybe think about it as much sort of get the chance to have that discussion, and people from various different classes being invited to go to this event specifically, I think was really beneficial to just have that conversation. We got some good quotes from students in the article as well. So I think it's a really well-rounded piece from Sam, like Chloe said, and some great pictures from her photo Xander as well. So big shout outs. With that being said, the top story in region and state comes to us from Rick Green at the Keene Sentinel. And this sort of is also a continuing discussion. It pairs with our editorial of the week, which is about the student ID cards not being allowed to, as proof of ID at polls when you register to vote, if you're a college student. So, if you have a OWL card and you go to the polls and you present that, that won't be acceptable anymore. You need to have a state-issued driver's license or a passport or a non-driver ID, whatever it may be, issued by the government. Doesn't have to be from New Hampshire. So again, there are you can still vote if you are a college student in New Hampshire. But with that being said, it does limit your options a little bit more, given that you can't rely on that student ID. So we talked a lot in the editorial about sort of how this just further inhibits and discourages students from practicing their right to vote, especially for those who are out of state, no longer being able to just fall back on having this college issued ID. In order to register, New Hampshire's one state where you can register on the day of for voting, which is definitely really helpful for people. But on the other hand, now adding sort of an additional layer of something that you need in order to do so, we kind of just said that we viewed that as a restrictive measure rather than what the proponents of this legislation have said, which is that it's a safeguard.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how I wrote an opinions piece not long ago about how they're actively making it harder for people to vote here. And lo and behold, here we have you can't use your student ID to vote anymore. As an out of state student, it's frustrating and it's just taking another form of identification away from those students. I don't see any need for it personally. Most college students are 18, like they're eligible to vote, and it's just making things harder for people when there really is not a large percentage of voter fraud, and it's just unnecessary.
Right, there's a couple of facets to it, and I think what we touched on is, for students who are out of state, having that choice of if they want to vote here versus back home, they should have that choice and not be restricted in that, given, what they might have on hand for proof of ID in order to register here. But this kind of, almost makes that choice not as tenable for people, especially this paired with some of the federal actions relating to trying to, limit mail-in voting or get rid of it entirely in some cases. So if you can't vote by mail back home and you live 3 hours away and now you don't have the necessary ID in order to register here, you might not just be able to vote at all, even though under the law you can. But if you don't have what it takes, even though you do live, on campus, you're living in New Hampshire majority of the year, you should be able to have that right. But in practice, some people might not. So it's a really big concern, and part of why Senator Shaheen stopped by is because talking about just how dangerous this could be, and also, something that I brought up during the discussion is when you have election laws that change so frequently, trying to educate students and just voters in general about what they might need and what they can do versus can't do now as opposed to a year ago, as opposed to 2 years ago, is just going to get harder because every year they pass a new measure that's, changing the law, and election officials can't really keep up and can't really get the information out fast enough. So you might find yourself, or someone might find themselves going to a polling place in November or September when the primaries are, and not having what they thought they needed in order to register, and then that person might not be able to vote.
Yeah, and I live 2.5 hours away for context, so it's not always convenient to go home. The last time I voted, I was in Connecticut for other reasons, so I was able to vote in that state. But it's just frustrating because there are people who live a lot further away, and it's not convenient at all for them to be going back to another state just to vote when we have voting polls right here, when we have transportation right here to the polls. It's just making things so unnecessarily difficult for these students.
Right, yeah. So, the region state coverage from the Sentinel paired with the editorial, there's a lot of discussion around this. It's a very relevant issue, so we felt the need to sort of just talk about it and bring it up. But both really strong pieces, and both very worthy of giving them a read. But with that being said, got some more uplifting stuff here. So the top story in student life is from our staffer Eliani, with pictures from our staffer Janet. Profile on Amara Gates, who was the student recipient of the Outstanding Women of New Hampshire Award. We had a preview of the Outstanding Women of New Hampshire event earlier in a piece in news from our staffer Sam, just talking about that as part of the Women's History Month programming. It's an event they've held for quite some time annually, which recognizes not just a student, but also, I think, faculty and staff members, statewide and regional difference makers, women who just have brought such a positive impact to in whatever work they've done. So when it comes to This year's recipient of the Student Award, Amara Gates, she is a Holocaust and Genocide Studies major who has a particular interest in the archiving section, which, we do have a graduate program in archiving and a pretty robust collection specifically relating to Holocaust and Genocide Studies pieces. And so it's really interesting to hear not just from her, but also from some of her mentors. I know Ronnie Obian was quoted in this, who's the head of the archives, speaking to just how thoughtful of a student Amara is. And I've just seen her in so many different various pieces of reporting that we've done, as she's also involved in other things on campus, such as the Panhellenic Council and also sorority life. So just sort of seeing her around a lot, I've come to sort of understand, why this award was given to her, is because she's just made such an impact on her area of what she wants to do as a career, and as a graduating senior, sort of recognizing what she wants to do from such an early on time, and really being so dedicated to it, I think is really inspiring.
Yeah, and I remember when we did the preview and news for Women's History Month, which was great. And we praised them for doing the award in general and being able to recognize students and faculty here on campus. I know who Amara is. I think that's great for her. I think it's a great opportunity. And I just love to see them recognizing students and female students here as well for what they're doing.
Yeah, at a time when a lot of programming that can be viewed as diversity, equity, inclusion is sort of under attack from both the state and federal level. Being able to continue to hold events like these, like we've said, is, I think, super important, because, these aren't even really recent developments. This has been going on for such a long time, and it would have been such a disservice not to hold it. So the fact that it still is able to be held, and that Amara, along with the other women recognized, were able to be recognized, is, I think, something to be happy about at a time like we're living in right now. So that's some good news for you. And also some more news here on the more positive side is a preview of the art and design showcase for graduating seniors in the art programs. So this piece is from Webmaster Charlotte, and so it kind of just talks to all the different students or several different students and professors as they get ready to do this big end of year exhibition where they've been working towards this for several months, and sort of just hearing about what they are looking to present and the different styles that they're going for and themes and things like that. These big end of year events, it just feels like it could be kind of stressful from a news perspective, because there's just so much to go over. And I think even just on the day of the showcase, there's also 3 other events. They have an academic excellence celebration coming up. You have the Momentum scholarship event thing coming up. You have Evening of Dance coming up. You have so many different things happening as people try to present their year-end work and things like that. And so sometimes things get lost in the shuffle, but I think as such a mainstay annual event like the Art and Design Showcase is one that's just so cool. I think just inherently just having everyone at their separate tables, where you can kind of just immediately see how much time and effort and love and passion went into these different pieces, and just that idea again of just students working so hard towards something and then seeing it come to fruition. It's talked about in the article how it is a stressful thing, just objectively, but knowing that end is in sight and being able to present that to the campus community and just the broader community in general is definitely a really satisfying thing, it sounds like.
Definitely. And I was walking through the Redfern last night while the fire alarms are going off everywhere. And I got to see some of the really beautiful artwork just in the hallways and the projects students were working on. And you see just how hard and how much effort they put into these. And it's really amazing they get to have this final showcase, especially for the graduating class, just to show off their work one last time and to really show everyone what they've been working on.
And events like these sort of just, adding so much to that all-important portfolio that people always talk about when you are job searching. And some of the people in this article talk about how they do have a job lined up, or, maybe some who don't. And, that uncertainty can be scary, but at least having that sort of reassurance that you have, the materials there, you have what it takes to be able to go into, the job search confidently is, I think, super important just for anyone in college. So it's a huge part of that art and design program, and so I was glad that we were able to highlight how much hard work is going on behind the scenes over at the Redfern and at the Media Arts Center with that. But we could transition now into the top story in sports, which was a sort of a different piece here. It's from our photo editor, Xander, along with our administrative executive editor, Jacob, who got one of the interviews for this, talking about the ECAC tournament, the Eastern College Athletic Conference, which is separate from the Little East Conference, which is the sort of during the regular season what the sports play in, typically what Keene State is involved in. But the ECAC is sort of this additional thing that they do like to participate in, teams do. And over spring break is when the ECAC was held for the women's basketball team, who unfortunately did not progress enough to get further in the playoffs in the postseason. So there was sort of a mix-up, and with the timing and scheduling, and with the fact that it was during spring break, the team was down a lot of players. They ended up only sending 6 players to the ECAC, so that takes 5 to field the team, and then 1 person on the bench, and that was all that they had. So the coach talks about how much he's appreciative, as well as the athletics director is appreciative of those who were able to come to the ECAC. But at the same time, the coach also talks about how, the other team had 18 players, and they obviously seemed well prepared and more, I guess, they sort of started off at somewhat of an advantage, because when you have players that could substitute on and play, and so, less players get exhausted as quickly, there's less, injury risk, I guess, involved. So it was kind of a hard situation here, and I think a lot of the quotes sort of hammer in on the fact that, there is somewhat of an issue maybe with potential lack of communication about the importance of this tournament, or, making sure that people were prepared ahead of time enough, because a lot of people did have alternative spring break plans on the team, and it might not necessarily be because that they wanted to miss this, but, if someone has something else going on, maybe they just had to. So I think there's a lot of, it's a very tricky thing to sort of navigate from a news perspective, but I think Xander and Jacob did a good job sort of giving the thorough look there.
Yeah, and I know this is a story that we've been following for the last couple of weeks, a story that I almost forgot about, but it's a very important one, and definitely different than what we usually cover in sports, but it really does hammer home how important communication is, especially towards the players. As a former sports player, I can't imagine just having one person on the bench and the other team has 18 players. That seems crazy to me. And I agree that it was a complicated situation, and I can understand the players' frustration, but also why the coaches wanted to move on and go to this. But it's understandable on both sides about what happened.
Yeah, and I just think, it's probably something on all sides to really learn from going forward, if this is going to continue to be a mainstay of not just the basketball teams, but also any other teams who have the opportunity to participate in the ECAC. If this is something that coaches or the athletics administration would like to continue seeing, making sure that players on those teams can anticipate that they'll have to make room in their schedule for that, because I think with proper, more efficient communication, making sure everybody is on the same page, something like this could be avoided, and seems like it would be a better situation for everybody. So, but given even with the reduced amount of players, I think what we saw is that they did still come pretty close to actually winning the game. So that's pretty impressive, I think. So, it's not really a black and white issue, but it is a really just interesting and sort of different piece again. So great stuff from our photo editor, Xander. But with that being said, that's it for the news recap this week. So as always, I'd like to extend a special shout out to the composer of the music for Noxcast, our very own Equinox alum, Zach Keenan, to the creator of the graphic for Noxcast, our very own art director, Elijah Fisher, and to the editor of Noxcast, our very own multimedia director, Noelle Hisgen. Until next time, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week